Hi everyone, can everyone hear me okay? I'll try and use my teacher yelling at the back of the room for a 5-year-old sort of aspect. I'll go into dad mode and be like, hey, we're up here. All right, so we're good. Hi everyone, so I'm going to give a little talk today, a little bit about my role. I'm going to talk a little about just generally information architecture and what we sort of do. And then I'm going to advocate for information architecture as a way to help with rapid change in organizations. I'll show you some samples. Mostly sitemaps, but well, you know that sitemaps are a smaller piece of a larger set of skills that we are trying to implement. And then I'll sort of end with some provocations about what this can help in organizations generally. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, but we'll get to the stuff at the end, and hopefully that makes some sense. So let's get going. So my background, I am currently an assistant professor at this institution where I teach in the graphic design department in web technologies. I also teach at the Otis College of Design in the product design department for teaching UX skills to people who make physical stuff. And when I find work that fits into my teaching schedule, or when I find fun projects, I can jump on them and do that. I've written a book. I write on Medium, blah, blah. You guys can all look this up. I'll provide my LinkedIn that I will have to do some of the updates from the last talk to improve that. But the role of this is really, I really like helping extend and teach human-centered design skills out to the world generally, and you teach those to students and then watch them go work at places like Apple and other places. So let's do a little bit of audience participation. The first speaker did this already, but we can sort of start in this place. Here's a little diagram of like things that are more non-technical versus high technical, strategy versus execution. Who here is a UX designer, or would call themselves a UX designer? Okay, good. Yeah, there's like a majority. What about a UI designer? Like focus purely on UI? Okay, great. Interaction designer? Anybody like have the role of information architect? Oh, really? All right, nice. It's like one hand that goes up. It's like, yes, that's my job role. I'm like surprised. I'm like, hey, we should chat after, because usually these roles or information architecture at one time existed, but now has sort of been folded into other people's roles, and we're sort of seeing that. Now, generally, again, you guys are all here, you know this stuff already, but information architecture generally is this opportunity to see information to improve systems at which we design, and that could include things like navigation, information architecture, or information organization, information relationships, IA management, IA strategy, and IA research. All that says is this is the stuff that designers who think about systems generally do, and it implements itself into improving user experiences generally. And if your, like they say, if your sitemap sucks, your user interface likely sucks, and that's just the reality of it. Now, I work on a lot of web products. The nature of what we do sort of does that. Here's some stuff involved in redesigning the University of Denver's web page, but IA existed before UX or any of these other things did, because the fundamental structures of what we design are built on web pages. Like a web page is based on a foundation of a database, which has structure. Whatever you guys, if you were designing web, you know you need an HTML page, you need a server, you need the page label, you need an index.com to sort of manage that thing, and that is helping let people accomplish a task, right? The web is not just there as an output, but it actually serves a role. If we know what that role is, that can help people do something. Go to school, find out about a program, apply, donate, whatever that is sort of essential to structuring those informations. Now, generally, again, this may be sort of things this audience probably already knows about, if you're sort of new to this. AI is sort of the nice intersection between what users need, what design can bring in the information, and what context or technology does that information display on, whether that's in a physical space, or whether it is in an application, or whether it is helping you get from point A to point B. And we have lots of signifiers, right? I have a name, badge, information. You now know who I am, you know I'm a speaker. All these things sort of help in generally helping people get where they need to go. Now, what I like to sort of talk about is that it's really systematic, like the gears of these outputs, but as designers who work in information and then now are responsible for communicating and building on those things, we can then take things like the ontology. What is the particular meaning of that thing? How do we know our audience knows what that thing means? How can we then put it into a taxonomy of other stuff that structures and logics is out? And then how can that be put into a set of decision making? I know I need, we're in a car space, I know I could organize the cars by date and by brand and by car maker, and then I can build a structure to get you to a choreography of output. And what that sort of aligns to is the sort of value of applying information architecture. Mostly I'll talk about sitemaps as a way to sort of structure this, but the value that they bring to organizations and why we as systems people and people who have to sort of traffic in these tools should, one, give a shit about them, and two, work on them really hard so that the outcomes that are born from their work have an opportunity to change or impact what they do. Now, this was sort of born, this is part of an article that I wrote on Medium, which is about the idea of the back of the television work, which is sitemap and information structure and all these things aren't necessarily the sexiest of deliverables, right? It's like, it's the stuff that people don't really want to, like, oh yeah, man, I saw that sitemap, so beautiful, mwah! Like, I'm hiring you just for that beautiful thing. Like, that's not necessarily the outcome. But this sort of provocation from Tom Scott, if you know him, he's on Twitter a lot, sort of talking about this stuff. But 90% of boot camps don't teach AI. It takes too long, it's too hard, and then that results in a lot of bad AI in the world. And if you like Google things, you can have the outputs. It also translates into information anxiety, right? How much are we managing? What do we have to manage systems of? I would be remiss not to include Richard Saul Wurman in any AI conversation, but that's just as it goes. Now, the world of this is sort of complex. If you Google information architecture or sitemaps, you might get things that pop up like this. These are literally the first page of Google outputs that you can do. And honestly, some of this stuff should make your eyes bleed. Like, oh, Canva's making templates that don't actually help, like, that are trying to force a non-information architect to do information architecture, and they're not even doing it right. There's no label. It's like, oh, you can make it look pretty, and like, well, who is this for? And why is it designed this way? And how is it then translated into this? Like, is this helpful for understanding how to work in something? Now, many of the systems we do are complex by design in some natures, and as designers, it's our role to try and unravel that rat nest or sort of unpack it. Now, one of the things that's great about information architecture and sitemaps as a whole is they are a living record. This is from an example of some work that I did at a previous job, where this on the left is the example of what they had when I joined the organization. That over there. Anybody think that's a good sitemap? I mean, maybe. I looked at it and was like, you guys are a multinational corporation. This is insane that this is the quality of what you are producing. Is anyone using this? And they're like, oh, yeah, we sort of put that together kind of fast because we needed to update our website. And you're like, you okay? And I was part of a consulting group that was responsible for auditing their entire system. And I'm like, oh, so you want us to use that to help an audit? And I'm like, all right, for us to do this effectively, fundamentally, we rebuilt and restructured all of their sitemaps. And part of what that was related to was overseeing the whole system, but then also structuring it in a way that allowed our team to know what was being manipulated. And they, the UX director at the time, didn't have any view. He was like, I have no idea what people are working on. I don't even know where they are or what is this doing. And part of what you can do that is that I moved it from that to this. Maybe you'll be able to use this. We took it, it was in FigJam before, but we sort of made it into a structured place where teams could output on it. And I'll show you some of the things that were sort of done to apply this. Now, aligning what is a primary, secondary, and tertiary page is something that we all know is important, but actually is relatively new for some people who are like, I don't know, I just need to see what it looks like, or I just need to know the output. Now, the role is that the systems we design on are alive. They get changed. We are responsible most of the times for making that change happen. And I don't know, how many people here have, like, when they made a new feature, were responsible for updating the sitemap? It's like one guy, okay, Derek's like, me, I have to do that. And it's sometimes, like, if you work with a product designer who's like to put that into a requirement for like an acceptance criteria of, like, you finished the work, your sprint is done. Anybody update the sitemap? Likely not, right? We had the same problem. Like, oh, our designers are all working on things, but none of them know, like, what stage stuff is in. Like, yeah, they're going to be updating a new set of leads or outputs or whatever that is, but we need to sort of indicate, and we sort of did that by tagging, literally using their faces they are working on this. They were responsible for this section of the site. They are working on that piece or whatever that is. And then we also use some things like it's in progress. This has not been added yet, but it's in a state of progress. You could go check with the product designer, or you could go check with the individual designers working on that thing. And then that allowed the directors that we were working with to oversee and use the sitemap not only just for, hey, here's what is made up of our website, but this is how I can have a lens or a view into people, into the people I organize, the designers that I have working on this stuff. And as a consultant, it was easier to sort of say, like, we know you need that. You don't think you need this, but we know that you do. And that is one way to show some value in AI. In IA, sorry. I'll mix that up a lot. The other thing that IA helps us do is it helps us manage change, right? Change happens from a lot of places in any system that we design. Users change. AI can shift how you make stuff. Stakeholders are always like, oh, no, I saw that we need this new feature. And you're like, do we need that? That's an important aspect. Market headwinds, user testing gives feedback that your navigation isn't working as optimal as it should, and new things need to be added. All of that to be said is that sometimes you need to oversee the system. And the system can be hard to understand, especially if you're just navigating a web page. I don't know, like I sort of see that we know that there's templates, we know that there's ways at which these things get designed, but visualizing that for teams can help us understand the volumes, right? Over here to the left is a set of key page templates. Basic little thumbnail diagrams that sort of gave a sense of what that thing sort of looked like from a structure and templating perspective. And that then allowed us to say, well, how much is being used or being deployed? Any of these templates could we remove or could we combine? Are in them very similar? We even found sort of challenges in like, look, you have 12 different footers. Like, why? This is crazy. Stop it. Like this is like, and the footer is like just choose one. Like that's it. Like it's not complicated. Like I know the lawyers get all in like crazy about it, but just give them a link and tell them it's there, right? That's how we're going to solve it. Now the IA helps us manage that change. Some of what is there, but also sort of what the system, its look and feel is doing without getting into much of the granular nitty-gritty of the design system. Ultimately, these type of things helped us make a recommendation to update a larger design system changes as a whole in the first place. Now, part of that relationship, which is really key, is that IA really helps us facilitate a much higher view of the things that we are trying to implement. And whether you're working on multiple sites at an organization or you have a consumer side and a business side, whatever, you work on like business systems, and a corporation's like, there's a JPL guy back there. It's like you have to deal within government systems, and their government systems have all these. I worked there when I was in grad school. I remember I had to get stuffed in Dan Goods's under Dan Goods underneath another organization so that they wouldn't know I existed because somebody got in some. Senator found out that there was an art worker at JPL and like threw a conniption shit in front of the output. It's like, oh my God, like, and now they're like, okay, we're gonna hide you in here or whatever. Actually, a small story of that. I was going to grad school at the time, and when I got my grad degree, I educated myself out of a job at JPL. They're like, oh, we don't have a role for you because the role we have indicated is only for an undergrad degree. And I was like, all right, fine, whatever. I'll just go do something else. But I still, whatever they do over there is still great. I still have really good friends that work in those places and that type of stuff. But the role of these systems can be very complicated, and helping teams understand, well, what is it made of? AI sitemaps are relatively quick to make. If you organize them and structure them well, make them have logic, use them as a sort of site down, like I can see the structure of the navigation that moves across, then you can say, well, what are you working on? And so it's like, oh, I'm working over here. This is my little domain that I get to control, and we need to make big changes to this problem, this space. Oh, great. For our director that we were working with, he needed to have that view, and he also was trying to make some big changes to the structure and logic of a lot of these systems, which also resulted in larger design system updates, relating those things as we sort of go. And the opportunity for building out systems like this is that it's not just one designer who makes them. We are on a team of 45 UX designers across a larger organization. They all were working off of bad baseline data. And if you fix some of that here, you can say, well, how did this help you? Right? And we did a little bit of qualitative, like, hey, you didn't have sitemaps before, now how are you using it? They're like, oh, well, I noticed that your sitemap isn't all that accurate. And I'm like, well, I designed it off the current web page. Have you guys updated the web page? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, if we're going to make this thing a living, breathing object, you need to then communicate those changes back to a centralized place, or that you can tag it, use your comment tool. We'll change it. We'll update this thing as you need. It is not written in stone. We get into trouble when we make, artifacts that we as nerds spend all this time working on, and then they just get dusty in a box, right? Like, how many of you worked on personas that no one looked at, right? You're like, great, we got personas. I'm like, you're working on new ones? Wait, why? Why are you working on new ones? Have you looked at any other ones that like researchers have done? Any of those relevant? They're like, oh, we don't even know where those are. And you're like, oh, like the Google Drive sort of like, it's a junk drawer of mess. You're like, oh, just go find it in the Google Drive. And you're like, dude, you're killing all of us with that. Now, systems logic and structure is some of the stuff that we need to care about, but if we can sort of translate those values into the artifacts we design, we can then scale those into leadership. One of my favorite things is we had a meeting, and the director with our overlord boss was like, look at this. We need to fix this system. And the guy's like, oh, I didn't even know it was that big. And I'm like, okay, all right. Like, yeah, that's a lot of pages. He's like, how many people work underneath this division? I'm like, you don't know. You oversee the division. Like, what? This seems crazy to me. But when you give that power to even simple relationships like this, it can help your team get more logical. It helps you design these things, and then they continue to have life, hopefully. I have no idea what the team's doing with them now. I'm obviously not working on this project anymore. But at some level, it sort of designs this. Now, as I was saying, the 10,000 view offers an opportunity for a good sitemap to sort of structure how the system works, but you also can then use it as a way to navigate how that actually flows. We were also working on a much larger audit, so the sitemap was a piece of the audit. We also then put screenshots together to show how this experience sort of worked, where we had long flows or slow things, or where that stuff was working. All that is sort of service related. But without the sitemap, you can't tie together where that experience happens in what space. So you're like, oh, look, this is 3 pages in, and it's really dense. Look, the page is way too dense at 3 pages in. Your user's trying to accomplish a task by this point. Let's talk about how we fix that or how that translates. Does that make sense? And again, a lot of these things sort of update that opportunity and then become these artifacts that if you're onboarding someone, you're like, hey, here's the system you got to learn. Here's a map. Here's an overview of that larger system. Then you're not just like spending the first 40 hours of their onboarding clicking through your website to understand how it works or what it does, right? And we've all sort of been in scenarios where that's your onboarding, right? You're like, I don't know, I have to get familiar with your system. You're like, did you use it? You're like, I can. You guys don't have documentation? And they're like, well, sort of. I'm like, do you have a sitemap? They're like, kinda. You're like, okay. Like, automatically you're sort of seeing like, oh, these are pieces that could be fixed, could be updated, and that has, again, aligns value. Now, sitemaps on their own don't really create that much. Most people don't see them, but the sitemap, if they are used and designed effectively, can be instrumental in building and designing more meaningful, useful, and scalable navigation systems. And most of what we do in trying to help a website is making a navigation work for our users' end goal, right? And that could be a side hub where you're trying to sort of re-architect an entire set of relationships of how we did that, make them drop-down systems or whatever. Like, this is also part of a larger set of relationships, but you can't get this unless you have a sitemap that architects or tells you what is supposed to be in the nav, if that's logical. Now, AI aligns people. We make stuff. It needs to work across lots of different screens experiences. And the way at which a sitemap sort of helps us understand the system says, well, how is it actually applicable as it moves on a desktop versus moving into a screen on your website, or is usable or useful on their phone as they move. This project in particular was for the Allergan Aesthetics Alley Rewards application, which is what I was doing with a company called Becker. But We have to design these things, right? The sitemap helps us do them. Most of us don't get the luxury of just like, I get to control the sitemap only. Like, just sitting there, like, yeah. Oh, you made some changes to the sitemap? Let me know. And then that's my job, and my job is only to make updates. No, like we know that's not the reality of the thing. But if your sitemaps, as I said, aren't very good, very likely that making changes or updating those things or making sure the system or the designers that touch that stuff are being consistent also makes it harder. Now, part of the things of sitemaps that can help improvements, and I'll sort of go over a few things. Improved information architecture will improve your product. And if you, like, that seems like, yeah, of course. But most of us, if we spend time on the stuff that nobody sees, if it has more logic and structure, it ultimately can do that. And we can improve those organizations by the 5 points I was just talking about in the sitemaps I just shared with you. But it's fundamentally the foundation on which we build the stuff we make. If your foundation is crumbling and it's not organized and it's not tightened together, you're going to have leaks, the ground's going to shake, your system's going to fall apart. And we see this at organizations all the time, places that think they know what they're doing, but you're like, it's like not good. And a little wind blew and your whole system fell down, and that's because you didn't actually have sound understanding or logic in the background. We want to design systems that are human-centered. Information architecture is a huge piece of making something desirable. I know that you call it rad car. So I'm going to say a section of rad cars or whatever. I'm just looking at cars over there because that's what comes to mind. But my point is the role of these things, if you have high quality information architecture, it applies itself across the user experience, both from how you understand your people, what is feasible within the technology to build and make that useful, and the viability of that being valuable to the business. And if we care about our users and we align our organizations in their information architecture, that fundamentally creates value for our own ports, but also the nerdy stuff that we give a shit about isn't just like, oh, you guys, like, oh, that's sweet that you care about that. That's nice, but we don't care. And so you may work at places that still have that point of view, and then just sort of finding storytelling of like, well, look at your end user. They cannot use this thing. You want to make more money, right? Okay, well, let's figure out a way to improve the system so that the system addresses your end users, which will help you in the endpoint. And again, there's lots of ways to do that. The third thing is that it can help organizations combat Conway's Law. Are any of you familiar with Conway's Law? No, okay. So Conway's Law states that organizations that design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of their communication structures of these organizations. When I first read this thing, I was like, oh my God, I'm dealing with a madness and our product is madness. And I'm like, oh, it's because the people are madness. They are reflecting the exact outcomes of what they're doing. And if you sort of say, oh, well, why is everyone sort of not knowing what the problem is or not knowing how the system is structured or organized? That could be a function of how large the team is organized, right? Too many people are touching it, so nobody touches it. So because nobody knows who owns it. And then there's just like, I don't want to own it. That's then going to be a thing I have to do, right? But designers say, like, I want to touch that thing. I want to own the thing that nobody else gives a shit about because then I can improve the system and that helps it, right? And the way in which this stuff can help is if your information architecture works well and you know how it is structured, you can maybe understand even more about your organization structure and then try not to repeat your organization structure into your information architecture. Users don't want to navigate a complex organization. They want to get to information that they need. And many organizations say, well, we got departments, so our sitemap has departments. And you're like, does your user care that you have a department? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what does your user want to do? Like, oh, they just want to fill out this form. I'm like, okay. So why is that hidden in 12 departments deep? Like, this stuff is sometimes can seem pretty straightforward, but sometimes the organization wants to do that. I think I showed an example of working for the University of Denver and updating their website. Sometimes sitemaps and navigation becomes like territory. Like, we're the psychology department and we need to be in the main nav. And I'm like, no. They're like, why not? And I'm like, well, I know you think you want to be because that somehow makes you important and you're in this meeting to try and like advocate that you need to be in the main nav, but you live here. See the site structure, see your organization, like this is where your user expects to find you, not at the primary point of entering your system or whatever that is. But so, we all know you don't win all those battles, and it's not dying on all of those hills. Like if you're, somebody really wants to, you're like, well, there's 7, and we shouldn't have more than 8, 9. Like, let's use some cognitive science to make sure our sitemaps make sense and aren't too hard to use. So, et cetera, et cetera. So information architecture and sitemaps are meant to be usable. If your sitemap is not usable, go make it usable. That's your job. And many are like, well, it's not usable because there's so many things. And I'm like, no, well, you can also use standard practices to understand what your people need. If your designers all need a better sitemap, go make a sitemap that addresses the needs of your designers so that they can go impact their things that they're making. And ultimately, we want to improve our information so that we can make systems better and we can improve the world. That's very like sort of idealistic. But those are my 4 points, and I was kind of fast.
Any questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm going to have an eternal sitemap question, which is, and I think you sort of touched on it, there's a saying in agile development, when you create a document, you either have to throw it away immediately or commit to keeping it up to date forever. So creating a sitemap the first time is one thing. How much time does it actually take to keep these things up to date? And what kind of commitment is that?
That's a great question. And that sentiment speaks to why people are like sort of hesitant to update them, right? Like, oh no, now we're creating design, we hear this design debt. Like, that's creating so much design debt. How do we, but I just want to make the solution. I don't want to have to manage the whole system to, update that. In those scenarios, what I recommend is saying, well, the sitemap is a piece of solving the problem, and therefore is a piece of an acceptance criteria for completing the sprint. And most of the times, these artifacts get ignored because they aren't associated into what success equals for the organization, right? So it's like, oh yeah, the web page got updated, and you're like, yeah, but only in the code. like you could skip a lot of steps by just doing massive updates, but there's also things that could be rapidly, even with design systems now, you don't need to update all of these processes. You just say, oh, I'm going to go update my sitemap, and it may actually update the entire design system. Like, there is a future where teams are working on that kind of scale, but therefore that puts more importance on the artifacts that are sources of truth. And so if you have things that you deem as source of truth, you then need to be like, we need to make this important for our organization to maintain and update. And where I found organizations struggle is when you have to have one person responsible for updating. So it's like, oh, we need an information architect to hire only to do that job. And like, no, this has to go across. Everyone who touches the system has to have some either a response mechanism. I need to comment into this, and then somebody who owns that thing can help update it, or they are responsible for making the change, updating the output, and ticking that off as part of the acceptance criteria. But lots of places don't do that, and that's even in the system we were designing. I'm not sure how many designers even then were sort of trained into updating or felt agency over updating those pieces, but we kept advocating for that idea of like, well, these are helpful, right? They're like, yes. Are your designers using them? Yes. Do your designers want to update them? They're like, well, okay, we got to tick that last box, because if you don't do that, the artifact drifts farther and farther away from being useful, and just is seen as like a sort of a pain in the ass, right? Like, I don't want to do that. And if nobody's going to check in on whether I did it or not, then I'm not going to do it, right? Some of that's, like, at the organization level, we were trying to say, like, how do you set quality practices across the outputs? And that's part of training and all sorts of other stuff that's larger than just, I have to make an interface or whatever. So, good question.
You mentioned nobody knows where this artifact is. Mm. Do you have good practices for placing it in somewhere other than a Figma file, perhaps even Confluence or otherwise?
It's also a great question. So did everybody hear what you said? Like, nobody knows where it's located? Like, how do you combat that? This is sort of a problem for the ages that, like, nobody's really, like, Figma, none of us have really figured it out necessarily. There's like Agile, Confluence. There's all these knowledge-based systems to do that. But the way to combat it at first is to make sure that it is essential. Like we used it for, like I didn't foresee that object being used for training. But new designers came on and they didn't know where to go, and so they went to system structure. And they're like, oh yeah, we're putting this in their onboarding documentation, and then that onboarding documentation has a link that is sort of then in a I'm sure they put it in a Confluence file. It says information structure here. Here's where you can sort of get a sense of what's going on. The more that trails to when you need it and why, which is part of a question of where your knowledge stuff is located in the first place at all, to some extent. And if that makes sense. So every organization does it different as well. I usually work on small, tighter teams, so it's like, yeah, it's all in Figma. You just got to go there. Like the Fig Jam's there. Like it's in Slack. I pinned it. Like that should be enough. But there's also that place of like, as you get into large organizations, it's harder to do that. So good.
You have another question? Yes.
My question is, how do you even begin to get like buy-in on it? Because I feel like I can create these things, but no one is even looking at it. So how do I even get them to start looking at it and get it into their own processes?
Again, another great question. Some of these things found, like, if you value it, others might, right? Like as I was saying, we looked at their system and was like, this isn't very good. We had to do a larger audit, which was part of a thing, and I'm like, well, the audit alone may not be the value that this, like the client asked, like, oh, we need you to do an audit. We were a consultant agency. I'm like, well, the value of the audit is maybe just in the recommendations we offer, but what if we built more artifacts that tied our understanding of the system? And I was new to it. I didn't work there. I was having a hard time understanding how their systems were put together in the first place. So by building them, you then sort of can fortify its access, but then you use them repeatedly. Here's why we're doing this. Oh, you should do this for this other thing. Great. Like our audit started as a small piece and then ended up auditing their entire platform. That in the like value exchange of like, hey, the client, like we got our small little budget of an audit to be taken from 1 quarter to 4 quarters. Like that sort of shows some value in that. But then ultimately it's presenting them and then showing and training your audience. Like we had to train our new UX director on why we did this. Some other things that we did, which I'll sort of show, is what if I can get one close? We also put Figma links. Like, do you want to know where this file is in your system? Here's a Figma link. Here is screenshots that we sort of stored. Here is a link actually to the web page. So if you like, the sitemap wasn't just a set of boxes, but it actually was a network into the access, and it became an access point for even, like he's like, oh, I don't even know where that patient list is, and he's like, oh, I can go to the sitemap and I can click on the link to the sitemap, and it takes me to where that stuff is being worked on, and we know how much stuff gets shared in all these different channels. Like I got a Slack channel, and I got somebody emailing me a link, and I've got it's all in this folder system, so I don't know where the stuff is located. And what we found is by structuring it and mapping it, we then could actually help designers and our directors get around faster. And when things do more than just one thing, right? It's not just a sitemap, but it's a sitemap that also helps me understand how people are using it, or it's a sitemap that helps me understand my templates, or it's a sitemap that helps me get around the system. Then maybe they're continuing to use it that way, but that was what we were pitching it as an opportunity to do that. And we, as the other UX designer that I was working with on this, we had to do that so that we could conquer, split and divide what we were responsible for. So before we're like, I don't know, I guess I'll take on the provider site. He's like, great. Okay, how long do you need? And I'm like, I need 4 days on this because it's lots of screens, and I can tell you how many screens because I've mapped it to the sitemap, and he can sort of count how many that is well, and then we could come in meetings and say, well, how many have you done? And we were even using it as like, check, check, check. Like, here's all the pages that I've audited and put into our deck. Does that make sense? So, but good question. Some of this is self-serving as well. Like, we make these things, we find them valuable, they're very nerdy, they're for information architecture nerds to some extent, and we also then, well, how do we also extend that and say like, hey, you want to know how you could care about it too? Like, look, you can move things around, or you don't think the label works? Like, give me a different label. Like, you don't want that to be called this? Like, fine. Like, I don't have it locked in stone. It's actually much easier to make updates and changes to artifacts like this than it ever is to update a website or like lots of change, like, and lots of. We were at an organization where a new UX director came in, and you could tell he wanted to do this with a lot of the system. And the system was in a place that he could do that. So he felt really comfortable. And then we're like, no, we need to lock it in a little bit. You can't, that's going to create too much madness. You may be okay with that, but the rest of your designers are going to be like, well, where's the strategy? Like, why are we doing that? And I'm like, oh, you could do that. You could take these pieces and fold them in here. Fine. But maintaining that is a good way to sort of help make those artifacts have more lasting impact or whatever. Anybody else?
Do you ever connect it to content strategy and SEO as well, your maps?
So these were all done for designers and internally. But yeah, again, how does your sitemap sort of extend to an XML sheet? How do you make sure that they're using best practices and labels and outputs? Like all of that can be that much more extensible in making sure that your source of truth of what your sitemap represents is accurate to what is being designed. And lots of places struggle with this idea because like how many pieces need to be updated when you change a navigation or you update your sitemap or you do these things that are there, create barriers to entry or say like, that's a lot of work. But by serving best practices into your sitemap structure and outputs and linking it into your SEO, that can justify a larger budget for why this stuff has larger meaning, right, or has larger value. And that was the one we like sort of snuck in, like, yeah, these are good, but also check out your SEO scores. They're kind of shitty. Like this page is no good. When we did the University of Denver's website, we did a whole mapping of SEO on their site of all their pages. So we could have an honest conversation with the university of like, this web page right here has not been hit in 5 years. No one has touched it in 5 years. Do you want to keep it? And they're like, but Nancy made it. And you're like, okay, Nancy did make this. Can we use it anywhere else? Or can it be, like, does it need to live with us? Like, is it necessary or can we move it? And the role of that actually is helpful for making it more knowledgeable and updating it as it goes. But those kind of experiences are like, yeah, use the data you can, help the systems work, and then that's sort of meaningful that way. So, yes?
So thanks for teaching us about the importance of IA. I think I'm learning a lot. But I guess as someone who's like starting to go into this field, I'm just curious, like for practice purposes, what are some of the indicators of good IA just from looking at a website versus bad IA? Because like you said, there's some websites that haven't been updated in 10 years and it's easy to tell. But there are some websites out there that like look beautiful, but sometimes might not have that IA, like you can tell.
Yeah.
But what are your like indicators?
I mean, that's a good question. We use the web a lot, so we sort of have this sort of like intrinsic ability to, like, that's something really usable, right? Usually you're like, if you're like, oh man, that really addressed my needs fast. The designers there really cared about me. I felt like likely that is in a set of structures. Like it depends on where you work, right? And all systems are very different. I'm at Art Center, I'm teaching a web technologies class, and one of my students is redesigning Blick, the art store outputs. I was like, great. And I'm like, man, this is going to be a nightmare for you. And she's like, why? I'm like, look, they sell 10,000 products, and their organization is both mapping departments and stuff all on top of itself. And people can use Blick. Is it good? I would argue that they have not done a significant information architecture mapping of what is meaningful to people because their primary nav has easels and paint and like all of that is maybe a process. You could have combined all those things into one and used a label that was more meaningful and get users into that access more meaning. Like they had all this stuff that was like, you could tell like, oh, we got kids stuff now. And you're like, just put it in the we always see this in navigations, put it behind the 3 dots. People will find it. You're like, no, they won't. Like, what's behind those 3 dots? Oh no, 12 other items. Like, like that's not we all know that that's sort of how it works. But sometimes designers are confronted with that. We need to add this. Can we add it to the primary nav? And you're like, no, well, we don't have another pattern. So now it's going to hide, or now we just have to sort of manage that in a sort of meaningful way. And a lot of times places don't want to do the whole like, well, now we got to tear it down and start all over again, because that's also incredibly expensive. But from a new designer perspective, best just use sound practices. Label. I see sitemaps all the time. No numbering system. I'm like, no, number it. Give it a good label that you know is sort of meaningful for what the information is. If pages are stacked, I've worked at places that are like, oh, well, this is 1 million pages. You're like, yeah, but you only need to represent it once. It's an article. It's all an article template. They're all articles. You can have thousands of them, but you don't put thousands of articles in your sitemap. You have one article detail, and it has a stack of them. And I can show you that there's a stack, and I could say, hey, you want to go reference that output? Things like that can be quite helpful. And the other thing is use size. Sometimes it's really helpful for primary, secondary, and tertiary pages, so it's logical. I see a lot of sitemaps that don't use how you read, top down, left to right, make your things have logic. That's my sort of best practices piece. Oh, you're good. It's time to go. One more? Okay, one more.
Thank you. I guess when I'm listening, I feel like 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of work on websites that had a whole taxonomy, and you were doing e-commerce, and you had this category and that category. And I feel like, at least from a user perspective, as search gets better, like how often are people really going on Amazon and drilling down through categories to find the product that they're looking for versus just putting the thing into the search box? Do you ever get pushback saying, we don't need to do this anymore because we have Google and AI?
Well, but you still have to define it. So whether it's a UI that navigates to it, or it's a label that someone types in there, it still has to be found. It still has to be like daisy chained into a system that lets you know how far you are in your output. Let's say, yeah, you search for a sweater. Sure. I know it's called a sweater or jumper, whatever. We talk about this in information a lot. How people call things changes. In England, they call them jumpers. In America, they call them sweaters. In some places, they might call them something else. AI is not that good at doing some of this yet. It's making some mapping to that. But the role of how you actually structure things can still allow value and be applied here, right? So yeah, if this works, I can still show you that you can get to that place faster through a search mechanism, which is then justification for maintaining that as a more relevant UI element in your nav versus the big navigation systems that people are.
So what you're saying is that this is important whether or not, or how much it's represented in the thing that the user uses.
The user will never see this, likely.
But traditionally, a sitemap would be like, okay, your first level navigation, your second level navigation, your flyout menus, whatever.
Yeah, but the sitemap is not a UI. It's just a representation of the information. If you can get your audience to the designers, the people you're working with, I can't even imagine what the sitemap of Amazon looks like, or if they even maintain one because they have too many thousands and thousands of products. It probably doesn't make sense, and that's why they have AI as a solution for that, or whatever, right? And so you sort of see like, oh, well, because it's too hard to maintain that, now we're not going to do it, and then you do that. But to fundamentally consider how to make things usable, what logic and structure is there, sitemaps as a whole can be a really great way to maintain those values and then manifest that ideally in a better UI for users. So, good. Thanks, everyone.